Good afternoon and welcome to those who are taking part in this virtual event and all those who are currently following us through the Leeds Cathedral YouTube channel. My name is Deacon Joe Cortis. I am the coordinator of Caritas Leeds and co-chair of the Criminal Justice Inquiry. So why have we gathered this afternoon? Can we have the first slide, please? Our purpose for this afternoon is to launch and share with you the outputs from our 2-year-long Caritas Leeds Justice Inquiry. These includes a number of outputs, which is a formal report, a set of challenging recommendations for actions, and a range of online resources and a local directory of services and agencies working within the criminal justice system, serving victims of crime, prisoners, ex-offenders, and their families. If we can move the slide, please. It is useful to offer a brief background to this initiative. Just under 2 years ago, Caritas Leeds held an open meeting to mark the second day of prayer of the poor, which Pope Francis initiated in 2017. The same year, incidentally, when our Caritas Leeds was launched. The main focus of this event was to hold workshops focusing on various groups in need to try to identify what are the current challenges faced by these groups and to explore ways in which the Church can help. One such group was prisoners and their families. Now, following feedback from each group, which incidentally included personal testimonials, the attendees of clergy and lay faithful voted to inform the social action priorities for the diocese through Caritas Leeds. The highest votes gained were to focus on young people and families and prisoners and families. So for the first priority, we have set up the Diocesan Youth Leadership Group, which we are calling the 12, working in partnership with Diocesan Youth Service. A group of comments from Diocese were recruited to develop a briefing paper and an implementation strategy to move forward with the other priority of focusing on prisoners and their families. So what were the aims of our inquiry? We can have the next slide, Matt, please. The first one was to increase the knowledge and understanding among Catholics of the United Kingdom's criminal justice and the experiences of people in our diocese on country. This was important because it was useful for us to raise our own understanding and also to share that understanding widely afterwards. The second aim was to focus principally on the restorative justice, and we'll hear a little bit more about that in this afternoon. And the last two were to encourage Catholics to actually take actions. And Tom, the other co-chair of this inquiry, later on will be sharing with you the recommendations that came out from our inquiry. So how did we actually address this? We can have the next slide, Matt, please. We held regular meetings of our 15 commissioners. We included a lot of visits and to Magistrates Court, for example, prisons, etc. And we've had a number of meetings, and there are details on the slide here of those people whom we have engaged with. I mean, predominantly, this was a listening exercise for us. We wanted to hear the voices of people on the ground, including prisoners, ex-offenders, and victims of crime. And I'm sure you would agree that perhaps these latter three, their voices are not often heard. And we also studied a number of numerous national and local reports, statistics, etc. So as you can see, the task was quite extensive, but I think all the commissioners have actually pulled their weight, and we actually delivered what we intended to do. If we can have the next slide, please. Now, This slide actually gives us a little bit more detail on how we actually approached our visits and our listening exercise with the number of stakeholders which we have encountered during the last 2 years. Essentially, we wanted to know about their purpose, the experience, the challenges and successes, and also the important aspect of change, and how can the church actually help in this. We'll perhaps stay a little bit longer on that slide. Can we go to the next slide, please? So a crucial question is, how did we make sense of the rich information we have gathered? Now, through a financial grant awarded by the Diocese of Leeds, we were able to employ a part-time researcher to analyze the rich data gathered and draw up themes informed by the following 2 key questions. We can have the next slide, please, Matt. So as you can see, these 2 research questions are linked very well with our aims of the inquiry. So essentially, this was the basis of the report which has been formulated as a result of this inquiry. You can have the next slide, please, Matt. So essentially, the outcome of this inquiry in terms of the fieldwork and the analysis has been incorporated into a formal report, which we gave the title of Justice and Mercy. These are 2 key important concepts which have informed our inquiry, and there are details there that you can actually access the report through the diocesan website. If we can remove that slide, please, and insert the other one, please, Matt. So the program for this afternoon, we've got a nice graphic there of the running order. In a little while, we'll start off with a scripture reading. We have 2 key speakers and 4 testimonials from individuals who are engaged within the criminal justice system or have a personal experience of it. And then my colleague Tom, the co-chair of the inquiry, will share with you the recommendations from our inquiry and also launch the online resources which we have developed. And then we'll have some closing remarks at the end. So if we now move to the scripture reading, if we can have the next slide, Matt, please. The scripture reading chosen for this afternoon is a reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep at his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, 'Come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and fed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and clothed you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these of my brethren, you did it to me.'" The Gospel of the Lord. I invite you now perhaps to reflect just for a moment on that gospel reading. If we can remove the slide, please, Matt. Now we move to our first speaker this afternoon, the Right Reverend Marcus Stock, the Bishop of Leeds. Bishop Marcus was consecrated a bishop in November 2014 at Leeds Cathedral and installed as the 10th Bishop of Leeds on the day. Before this, Bishop Marcus, amongst other positions, was a parish priest, an RE teacher, a director of schools for the Archdiocese of Birmingham, and General Secretary for the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales. Bishop Marcus, you're very welcome, and I invite you to address us.
Thank you very much, Reverend Cortis. It's my great pleasure to take part in this online launch today of the Criminal Justice Inquiry report entitled Justice and Mercy. And I would like to begin by thanking Dr. Cortis and Mr. Chibo, the co-coordinators of the Commission, and all the members of the Commission who've given so generously of their time over the last 2 years in the work they have done to produce this report. Caritas Leeds is an arm of the diocese which represents the social teaching of the Church. But it's not intended to be a central structure that organises or dictates the social action carried out in our diocese. Rather, it has a coordinating role. Its purpose is to draw together those organisations and groups which are already concretely putting into practice the social teaching of the Catholic Church. It's to encourage collaboration among them and to foster a greater appreciation of the spiritual foundations which are vital for their mission as an authentic expression of Christ's call to serve the poor and those who are often neglected in our communities. It's also a forum where we can try to identify those areas of need which are not being addressed. And it was in this context, in this forum, that Caritas Leeds recognised the need for a greater awareness for us to respond not only to the pastoral care of prisoners and their families, but also the often overlooked pastoral care for the victims of crime, and to the role we can play in calling for prison reform and the promotion we can give as a community to restorative justice. And this was the starting point for Leeds Caritas's Criminal Justice Inquiry project. The official policy of the Catholic Church in England and Wales to the whole issue of prisons and criminal justice had already been set out in the year 2004 by the Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales in their publication, A Place of Redemption, a Christian Approach to Punishment in Prisons. And the primary focus of that report was on the state of the nation's prisons. It was a statement of the Church's views and policy rooted in Catholic belief and theology. And it presented a challenge not only to the prison system, but also to the Church itself. It stated, there needs to be a change in attitudes within the Catholic Church towards those in prison. As a Church, we have to acknowledge that concern for those in prison is, despite it being one of the broadest statements of Jesus's command to his followers to serve him, it's not at present high up on the agenda of many Christians. On this, the report says, we need to examine our consciences. It goes on to say that Jesus invites us to see him in the marginalized, alienated, and rejected, and thereby he calls us always to extend his kingdom of mercy and compassion. And finally, it says, through justice and mercy, hope and forgiveness, no one is beyond the reach of God's promise. Well, the criminal justice inquiry commissioned by Caritas Leeds has built on the findings of that report, and through its own investigations is proposing in the report which we are launching today some recommendations for action for our own Diocese of Leeds. These actions promote, encourage, foster, and support a Catholic approach, a form of restorative justice that seeks to address crime in terms of the harm done to victims and communities, and not simply as violations of the law. The actions for recommendation will be presented by Mr. Tom Chibo later in this launch, and I wish to commend them to the people of our diocese as together we seek to build up God's kingdom in our communities and in our society, and to imitate the mission which Christ himself proclaimed he had come to undertake: to proclaim good news to the poor, liberty to captives, sight to the blind, set free those who are oppressed, and proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. I'd now like to conclude by a prayer which Reverend Cortes has asked me to lead, a prayer for justice and mercy, the title of our report. God our Father, fill our hearts with the compassion of your Son for those in prison. Cure with your mercy those who are suffering in mind and memory. Soften the hard of heart, the captives of anger. Free the innocent. Parole the trustworthy. Awaken the repentance that restores hope. May prisoners' families persevere in their love. Grant healing to the scars of those who are victims of crime, and bestow on victims' families the forgiveness that reconciles. Give wisdom to lawmakers and to those who judge. Instill prudence and patience in those who guard prisoners. Make chaplains in prison ministry bearers of your light, for all of us are in need of your mercy. We make this prayer through our Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God, for ever and ever. Amen. Thank you.
One of the most beneficial aspects of this inquiry was meeting with people from various sectors working or providing services within the local criminal justice system, because they gave us such a clear insight on what is actually happening on the ground. Last November, we held a gathering at Wheeler Hall and heard powerful and insightful testimonies from a senior police officer working with victims of crime, a senior member from the probation service, and founders of two local agencies working with ex-offenders. This afternoon, we are going to hear testimonies from 4 different individuals. One of the key findings from our inquiry was the challenge of mental health issues and addictions, and that these are not only challenges for the individuals concerned and their families, but equally for the statutory and non-statutory agencies working within the criminal justice system. I am very grateful that Wayne Redmond has very kindly agreed to share his story with us. Wayne is going to focus on his experience whilst in prison, and specifically about substance misuse, challenges with mental health and addiction. Wayne, you are very welcome, and we look forward to hear your testimony.
Okay, thank you, Reverend. Yeah, it's a great honour really for me to come and share, you know, one as a Christian and one to sort of share my experience really of what I went through as a child, a teenager, and then a young adult. I was brought up in a broken family. Do you know, I lived with my dad. My mum wasn't about, and then I had a carer who was quite abusive, do you know, in mid pre-teen years, and it left me with a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, even as a young child. And I remember the first time I ever took a drug. I was 13 years old, and I didn't know at the time. Do you know? I just thought I liked the feeling that I got off drugs, but really, it just stopped me feeling the way that I kind of did, really anxious, really full of fear. Yeah, and my drug taking led me on to commit quite serious crimes when I was a teenager. And I was in young offenders by the time I was 17 years old. You know, I suffered quite bad with my mental health, with anxiety, and I'd do a prison sentence, and you know, my experience was that I was given no life skills whatsoever. So when I came out, I was just unable to cope, and prison just became a revolving door for me. And I literally spent 25 years of my life just on this revolving door. And it's my belief that if recovery was an option, you know, if recovery programs were an option in prison, you know, that revolving door would have never have happened. You know, the cycle of my life would never have happened. My life did start to change when I was 40 years old. And this came totally out of blue and totally as a shock to me. You know, I had a road to Damascus moment, you'd call it. God appeared in front of me, touched my life. But, you know, and I'm so grateful for that. I love my life as a Christian. I love, you know, being able to give back and using values that God installed in me. Yeah. It took a while from that road to Damascus moment to actually have an impact in my life, really. Do you know, there was obvious changes straight away, but, do you know, I still had this addiction and I still had this mental health problem. And probably 2 years into being a Christian, I reoffended and went back to prison. And for me, that was the beginning of the end, really, of you know, me offending, me taking drugs, and me sort of going to prison. It was such an horrific experience to go to prison as a Christian and to be in that environment. I just kind of knew that would be the last sentence that I kind of did. And I come out in 2018. And what I believed, you know, really helped me was just being accepted by society. I got involved in a recovery group, you know, and I wasn't judged. And I think it was the first time in my life that I felt that, you know, I wasn't judged by society. You know, and I got clean and I slowly started to rebuild my life. And part of my sort of amends to society, really, is to help other prisoners, you know, and it gives me, you know, and I go around schools and I spread the message about, you know, drugs and life choices. Yeah, and it's kind of, you know, I do believe it's part of my rehabilitation and my being made right with God to kind of go and, you know, make this my life's work, which I kind of do these days. Yeah, and like I say, it's a great honour for me to sort of be involved in any kind of church reforms. I'm not really sure what church can do to help people like me, apart from, or people with addiction and mental health problems, apart from just be there for them, really, and accept them and help them rebuild their lives. I think people are so used to society shunning them that they feel bad, and the only way to stop them feeling that way is just to pick up another drug, and the cycle continues. At some point, the cycle's got to be broken, and I do believe it comes through acceptance. Do you know, people understanding. Do you know, I do believe most people that are sat in prison today suffering from mental health problems, and drugs are just the solution to that problem. And I think, you know, I think recovery programs should be mandatory in prison. It's no good giving a prisoner an English class, do you know, when they can't cope with their addiction. Do you know, that needs sorting out first, in my opinion. I just felt I'd been punished, rather than try to be rehabilitated. And I think if I'd have had that at 17-year-old, do you know, this cycle for me just wouldn't have happened. Like I said today, I work with a small charity now that tries to help these people and helps the family members of these people, do you know, because it isn't just me that was suffering, my whole family was suffering. And it went on for 25 years. It kind of, it robbed me of a life, but it sort of gave me a life as well. And I'm, do you know, grateful that I get this opportunity now to dedicate my life to helping other people, do you know, which is great for a Christian, do you know. So, yeah, I thank God for that. Yeah, and, do you know, I ain't really got much more to say, really, apart from, do you know, it's great that people are just even looking at addicts in a different way and looking how they can help them. Yeah, and it's a great honour to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wayne, for a most powerful testimonial. One of the aims of our inquiry, as shared with you earlier on, was to explore and reflect on approaches to restorative justice. Restorative justice has been a strong theme, as Bishop Marcus mentioned earlier on. It emerged out of a number of reports from the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales. But we wanted to delve deeper into this and adopt a more local and a practical approach to it. There is a distinct section on restorative justice in our report, but I'm pleased that we are able to include a testimonial on this concept this afternoon. Kate Brooksbank and some of her colleagues contributed to our inquiry. Kate is the West Yorkshire Restorative Justice Manager working for Restorative Solutions. This service is commissioned by the Office of the West Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner through the Ministry of Justice Victims Fund. Kate has been involved in restorative justice since 2008, and prior to that, Kate was a probation officer. Kate, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hearing about your experiences.
I'm the West Yorkshire Restorative Justice Manager. So I manage the service that delivers restorative justice across West Yorkshire. We work with services across the 5 districts where victims or offenders want to take part in restorative justice. So our particular service works with victims of all ages and with offenders over the age of 18. We work very closely with the youth offending team, who will work with people that have committed crime under the age of 18. We work with all offence types, so there's no particular offence type that we don't work with, and we can work when a victim has initiated restorative justice or an offender's initiated restorative justice. We can facilitate cases when court orders are in place, and we can apply for variations in the court. So we cover a real range of offences and victims and offenders that we work with. The team is made up of 5 staff members with volunteers from across West Yorkshire, and we've got currently about 37 volunteers. So volunteers are really a strong part of what we do and how we work with those people that want to access restorative justice. So what is restorative justice? So restorative justice is a process, and it brings people that have been harmed by crime and those responsible for that harm into communication with each other. It enables everyone affected by that particular incident to play a part in repairing the harm and finding a positive way forward. So for some people, they want the opportunity to meet with that person in a face-to-face meeting. For other people, it might be that they've got specific questions, but they might not want to meet face-to-face. So it might be something that we as facilitators do in an indirect way. That might be a letter of apology. It might be shuttle mediation, where we might take questions back and forth. The process is really about those people that are involved and what they want from that process. Restorative justice is a proven significant impact in terms of victims and helping them to achieve closure after what's happened and for them to move on with their lives. And nationally, 85% of victims who have participated in restorative justice would recommend it. For those that have committed the crime, restorative justice is an opportunity to face the consequences of their actions, recognise the impact that's been caused, and where possible to make amends. The restorative justice is part of the Victims Code. So the Victims Code is about the expectations that victims can expect from the criminal justice system when they've reported a crime. As part of the Victims Code, information about restorative justice should be given to all victims, as well as information about other victim services such as victim support. We've done a lot of work in West Yorkshire to ensure that people know about restorative justice, because how do you ask for a service if you've never heard of it? So a lot of people that maybe haven't understood or don't know what restorative justice is, quite often will question why someone might want to take part in that. For some victims, it's about understanding why that offence happened. So having the opportunity to ask those questions, having the opportunity to explain the impact of the offence. People might have explained the impact to family members or friends, but actually to have that opportunity to explain the impact to the person that's caused that harm can be really powerful. For some victims, it's about overcoming fear. For some, if someone might be in prison and due for release, obviously that can really increase anxiety for some victims in terms of what will happen when that person's released. So having the opportunity to take part in a process where they can get their questions answered and understand what led to the offence happening can be really powerful. If we think about the criminal justice system, when do victims get a voice in that process? If they've got questions or they want the opportunity to talk about the harms being caused, when do they get that opportunity? And I hear some people say that when they take the stand in court cases, they have that opportunity. But that's not about the victim. That's not about what they need. It's about the case, and it's about what that case needs to prove or disprove what happened. Other people talk about the victim impact statement being an opportunity, and this is a great opportunity for a victim to talk about the impact of what's happened. However, there are limitations in terms of how long that report can be, whether the judge chooses for it all to be read out or for certain bits. And most importantly, there's not the opportunity for a two-way dialogue between both parties. So if someone has questions, the victim impact statement doesn't give the opportunity to get those questions answered. What we know is for some victims that go through restorative justice, it can have a really important impact on how they cope and recover after a crime, and it should be a victim's choice as to whether it's something they're interested in. Quite a lot of people ask, why would an offender want to take part in restorative justice? Because actually this is really big, and actually it takes a lot of support and a lot of confidence for someone that's committed a crime to sit in a room or to communicate with the person that they've caused the harm to. So it's really important that us as facilitators, we support victims and we support offenders through that process. For some offenders, it's their opportunity to take responsibility for what they've done. It's about facing up and hearing the impact. Quite often we have people that come to us when the offence was committed, they was using drugs or alcohol at the time. So they might not necessarily remember, or they might be unsure why they did what they did, or they might have a lot of regret and feel it was quite out of character. For some people, they've done offence focus work and they've had a better understanding of how their behaviour might have impacted on others, and so want to opportunity to engage in restorative justice. For some, it's about an apology. For some, it's about explaining why the offence happened. If the offence was unintentional, so that person didn't go out that day to cause the harm that was caused. Or for sometimes when people have been through the court process or the police have made them aware of something specific about that victim, it might motivate them to want to go through that process. So what we know from my personal experience is that victims come to us for a variety of different reasons. They can come to us because they feel that what they need, they can't get as part of the criminal justice system. And when we talk about the outcomes that might have happened as part of the criminal justice system, we can work with people where there's been an out-of-court disposal, where there's been a community sentence, where there's been a short-term prison sentence, through to those that get a life sentence. So while society might view that a lengthy prison sentence has been really helpful for that victim, it might not have given them the opportunity to understand why something happened. Different victims have very different needs. And an example is a death by dangerous driving case that I was involved in. There was two sisters who'd lost their dad. One wanted to talk about what actually happened on that day and the actions that were caused, and what the last few minutes of their dad's life was like. For the other family member, she wanted the opportunity to talk about the impact. She didn't need to know the questions that her sister had, but she wanted the opportunity to talk about the impact. And I think that demonstrates that for the same offence, the different needs that people have in going through that. For some people, access restorative justice for closure, and for others, it's about forgiveness. However, it's important that the process of restorative justice is not necessarily about achieving closure or forgiveness. It is a process which might help in moving to that point. But for a lot of victims, that's not why they access restorative justice, but it can help on that journey. It's also really important to understand that offenders can also have experienced harm and have been victims. And we've definitely worked with cases where an offender might be in prison and convicted of a crime, but we're working with them as a victim of a crime against them. So restorative justice is really about working with those people to see what people need and want from the restorative process. So how might you get involved in restorative justice in West Yorkshire? We need to raise awareness more about restorative justice for victims, offenders and communities. We need people to know that this exists and it's something that they can look to take part in. We also, throughout the year, will look at volunteering opportunities, and we know the volunteers currently engaged find it really rewarding seeing the difference that they can make to people's life. If you want to find out more about restorative justice in West Yorkshire, we've got a website which is www.rjwestyorkshire.org.uk, and it's got all our contact details on there. So please get in touch if you want to find out any more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate, for that very powerful testimony. And can I just say that the video, that the podcast that Kate was referring to is actually accessible through our website, which Tom will give details about later on. Another important aspect of our inquiry was to raise our own awareness about agencies and charitable groups involved in support and rehabilitation of prisoners and ex-offenders. Over time, we heard of the excellence that these agencies provide, the impact of their work, but equally about the challenges which the third sector is currently experiencing. This afternoon, we will hear about one such agency, and I'm pleased to welcome Jane De Geer, who is the Chief Executive of the West Yorkshire Community Chaplaincy Project Resettlement Service. Jane is also one of our commissioners. And Jane, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hear about your experiences and the challenges that you are actually facing. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's lovely to feel that there are around about 30 or 40 people watching this live YouTube video through the Caritas, through the Cathedral YouTube channel. So that's great. So as Joe said, I'm Jane De Geer. And as well as contributing to this criminal justice inquiry as one of the commissioners, I'm also the director of YSIP Resettlement Services. I'm going to tell you about what we do and also touch upon the challenges faced by organisations such as us at this time. YSIP was established by the coordinating chaplain at Leeds Prison way back in 2005. He and his team were well aware of the problems that men faced when they left prison. And at this point, I'd just like to refer back to Wayne. Wayne, fantastic presentation that you gave, and it really resonated greatly with the work that we do and sounded like a very, very familiar story. So the chaplains in the prison would constantly see the same old faces coming back to prison time after time. He knew that these men desperately needed support in the community and was frustrated that the prison chaplaincy team didn't have the capacity to do this. So his notion was that faith communities could provide support in the community, and he brought together a group of like-minded people from a range of faith communities, and the West Yorkshire Community Chaplaincy Project was born. Now WYSIP Resettlement Service, we're a well-established resettlement charity and part of a wider community chaplaincy network, and there are more than 20 community chaplaincies around the country doing similar sorts of things to what we do, although we're one of the oldest and most well-established. We're based at Leeds Prison, just opposite the gate, and a very small team of just 6, supported by around about 15 volunteers. Our aim is to help men when they come out of prison so they can resettle successfully back into our community. And our support is mainly practical, but it also includes pastoral support when needed. We work with men, male prisoners and ex-prisoners, and through our partnership with Jigsaw Visitors Centre, we also support their families. These are the hidden victims of their partners' and offspring's crimes. We support men through the gate. We meet them before release to find out what they think they will need when they come out. The majority of the men we see have no settled home to go to, have a range of health issues, and many have problems with drug and alcohol misuse and finances. We meet men at the gate on the day of release, and we go on to support them in the months and sometimes even years following. The big positive about these men is that they are willing to engage with us because they've reached a point when they really want to change their lives, and they are acknowledging that they need help to do this. One of the main things we help with is to find men somewhere to live when they come out and to support them staying there. And if you read the report, you'll find out that there is a real massive issue around accommodation for people leaving prison. They will usually need help in claiming benefits, sorting out debt issues, accessing the medication they had when they were taking in prison. They often need support in registering with a doctor and a dentist. Later on, they value our help in finding positive things to do with their time, ideally finding a job or doing some volunteering or training. We work closely with the probation services and complement and support their role. We also have a counselling service for the people we work with, and this helps them to work through any emotional and unresolved issues that they have that would help them to move forward. We couldn't undertake the level and depth of work we do without our wonderful volunteers. As I said earlier, we usually have around 15 volunteers working with us at any one time and put them through a rigorous and challenging recruitment process before providing them with really excellent training and support. Our volunteers come from all walks of life, and we love it when we can recruit volunteers from faith communities. In fact, 3 of our current volunteers actually have come to us through the Caritas network. Since we started, we have received over 2,000 eligible referrals. We work with around about 200 men a year and give as much support as we can to help people to start to live constructive, law-abiding lives. Over the last year, we provided over 1,000 hours of support. We seek to create independence and to empower the people we work with. However, we're always there for people. If issues arise, they can always pick up the phone, pop into the office, and we'll continue to help them or start helping them again. I'm very, very proud of what we do. We really do make a difference in the lives of people who may have been written off long ago. People who have been damaged by poor parenting. Many of them have been in care. Many may have like undiagnosed learning difficulties and mental health issues. We're successful and expect that only 68% of the men that we've supported will be back in prison a year from release. The average reconviction to prison rate for Leeds Prison is 60%. Ours hovers around 30%. It costs around £250,000 a year to provide our service. And whilst we save the state more than £2 million by enabling men to resettle without offending, we receive no funding whatsoever from the Ministry of Justice and rely on charitable trusts and donations from congregations. And I should just add, we also receive some funding from Mark Williamson, the Police and Crime Commissioner, for which we're very grateful. So that's YSIP Resettlement Service. But I've also been asked to talk about the challenges faced by the third sector within this field. This would make a whole presentation in itself, so I will summarise and pick on just one element, which you may not be surprised to hear that these challenges stem mainly around accessing grants and funding, with an intrinsic problem being that the national statutory sector, and particularly national commissioners, tend not to understand the voluntary and charity sector. One misapprehension is that because we are charities, we are cheap, and because we use volunteers, we could even be free. Money is hard to come by. Charitable trusts are marvellous, however, their funding is overstretched. We've been coping for years with the current political appetite for privatisation, which brings with it the need for both profit and economy, and those things just don't work in my mind. Commissioners are as, if not more, concerned with price than with quality of delivery, and this means that the people we support suffer. Contracts are, in my opinion, usually under-resourced, making them difficult to deliver effectively without additional charitable funding, and in my mind that is unethical. So on that note, could I highly recommend to you that you read the report and look at the recommendations, and it may be that some of you can help the Commission to actualise some of these recommendations. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Jane, for such a powerful testimony. We come now to the fourth testimony. During a visit to one of our local prisons, we were very keen to speak to prison chaplains to get an insight in their role and their experiences. One of the commissioners in our inquiry was a very experienced sacramental chaplain to one of our largest prisons. Now, as a group of commissioners, we have attempted to liaise with a number of prison chaplains, but this afternoon I am pleased to introduce Chris White, the prison chaplain at HMP Leeds. Chris was also a contributor to our inquiry. Prior to becoming a prison chaplain just nearly 2 years ago, Chris was a teacher of English. He told me that he moved, and I quote, from one building full of sirs and myths and with plenty of rules to another variety of the same. So, Chris, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hear about your experiences.
Thank you, Joe. So, hello, I'm Chris. I'm the lay Catholic chaplain at HMP Leeds, and as curious a statement as I ever find it to say, I continue to enjoy my role, as it's not only a ministry, but an absolute privilege. I used to be, as Joe says, a secondary English teacher by trade, but the more serious my prayer life grew, the more evident it became I couldn't sustain both branches and that my faith and daily life needed to become intertwined. I'll shortly begin by mentioning two saints I find particularly compelling when considering prisons and the people housed within them. The first, Saint Dismas, otherwise known as the Good Thief, who was crucified alongside Christ. A criminal in his day, 2,000 years ago, receiving social justice at the hands of the Romans. His example, however, of accepting his punishment as just, then recognizing Jesus' divine nature, and in turn being assured of his admission to paradise, is a wonderful exchange for all, but surely holds special meaning for prisoners. Namely, Christ, whilst dying, rewards the faith of a humble criminal. The second saint would be that of St. Maximilian Kolbe, the Polish priest and martyr who offered his own life in a Nazi concentration camp to save the life of a fellow prisoner who had a family. St. Colby, albeit a prisoner like St. Dismas, suffered at the hands of human injustice and at the sheer will of an evil empire imposing its tyranny upon every life it could. Once again, we have an incredible example. In the face of genocide, rampant cruelty, and absolute despair, with his heroic sacrifice. Building upon the humble redemption we see with the good thief, here we see that Christian witness is possible in all places, even in a jail setting. Justice and mercy, as the name of the Caritas Leeds report, have been two key themes of these efforts into investigating criminal justice. So Joe has asked me to offer a few reflections from my role. The majority of prisoners have a surprisingly honest vision of their offences and culpability and are quick to accept time in jail as justice for their choices. The good thief's part in Scripture is a keen example of how earthly justice pales in significance to divine justice, while St. Colby's experiences serve to warn us how human evil can so badly corrupt our supposedly fixed pillars of justice and fairness. Indeed, some of the Pharisees believed they were protecting their faith from a troublesome blasphemer, but their obsession with supposed justice had their ears blocked and their eyes blinded from Christ's true nature. The concept of justice has become more of a widespread conversation in 2020, I'm sure you'd agree, amidst the COVID-19 lockdown. People of all ages, ethnicities, backgrounds have found themselves unwilling prisoners in their own abodes. Not long after such self-imposed conditions does the human experience lead to anxiety, fretful thoughts, and negativity. Likewise, as the economic turmoil unfolds, people raise more questions about undeserved suffering, again, much like the prisoners I meet on a day-to-day basis. During the height of the lockdown, the numbers of prisoners who made wry comments to me about the greater population now experiencing their lives was staggering. Justice, in an earthly sense, remains front and centre in people's minds. As the Catholic chaplain, I try to nudge that perspective to match that of the good thieves. Yes, respect the earthly one, but focus on the divine justice. The second theme, then, that of mercy, is obviously a characteristic that the role of prison chaplain is built upon. My daily tasks include pastoral visits, welfare check-ins, making phone calls to the loved ones of prisoners, providing, suggesting, and discussing reading material, being a trusted ear, administrating, sadly, the bereavements of prisoners' loved ones, visiting those who are in segregation units for whatever behaviours they happen to have shown whilst in custody, and most importantly, organising the Catholic provision. Usually this involves organising attendance for Catholic Sunday Mass, my thanks to Father Paul Williamson. However, since COVID-19, Mass has been and continues to be suspended in custody alongside all congregational worship. Mercy can often be a lived out experience in my role rather than a theory that people can talk about. For example, helping an illiterate prisoner to read and write could be a short thing. You know, they might need to write a letter to mum, to their partner, to their children, that sort of thing. Communicating with prisoners' loved ones to assure them of their relatives' welfare when they've run out of phone credit, for example, because often we get grandmothers, as a good example, who are worried sick about prisoners because the men inside choose to ring whoever they choose to, their credit runs out like that, and grandmothers are there being doting grandmothers. We offer prayers on anniversaries of the deaths of loved ones. Probably my personal favourite small bit of mercy in the role. Always feels a bit like people going to the graveside of a departed loved one and making that journey. We get to make the men feel like they've made their mark on the anniversary of such a sombre day. We can refer various issues to the uniformed staff in the building or the relevant parties indeed. One of the greatest, perhaps, acts of mercy in such an environment is the simple act of listening. Mercy is found in patience and the giving of one's time in the prison setting. Most often than not, when I talk to any kind of inmate in HMP Leeds, you listen to someone, you may not even offer advice, you just stand there and listen to what they're saying and sort of, your way through the conversation, giving a little bit of advice here and there. And even if you haven't provided a solution or a useful answer, so often some of these sufferings and problems can't have like that, the men will turn around at the end and say, thank you for your time. And it's quite an interesting one. It's obviously for me, certainly during COVID-19, when it's been 23-hour bang up for men inside, it does show you, whether through a cell door, whether out on a landing, it is a setting in which people do not feel listened to. So when in the media and in the newspapers and the news, you hear about, the stereotype of a prisoner losing their temper a little bit and doing who knows what and becoming angry and ending up down a segregation unit, it's not the full story as such, because any of us, I'm sure, like with the COVID-19 lockdown, find frustration a different animal altogether in such settings. I've also been asked to offer some quick thoughts on the role itself. I personally find it very, very fulfilling because of the rather unique pace to it. It can be a slow, fast job. I personally have never encountered one like that before. So one day I can find myself zipping around wings rather frantically or phoning several different agencies to confirm and collate information in a hurried way between hospitals and undertakers and so on. The next day it could be calmer with one-to-one sessions and prayer groups and even more time for personal prayer and reflection. Hearing the trials and suffering of the men inside also helps me shift my perspective to gratitude for one's blessings, which in itself is quite a blessing from my point of view. It allows me to realize if you're having a day where you're feeling a bit self-pitying, hearing such stories always helps to push your own understanding and perspective. But for me, I've found in this role a way to live my faith day to day, whilst encouraging others to live upstanding moral lives, both in a Christian Catholic sense and as hopefully reformed citizens. Some quick notes before I conclude. My thanks to obviously Deacon Joe and Tom Chigbo for organising this initiative and actually visiting HMP Leeds with their commissioners in tow and taking the time to engage with us and have a view of what the prison's like. I have read the excellent report, and like Jane, I encourage you all to take time to read through that because it presents a broad spectrum, picking on, like they've intended to do, different agencies and those of us in different roles. My thanks also to Father Paul Willamant and Monsignor Peter Rosser, without whose efforts Holy Mass would not be celebrated behind bars at HMP Leeds. We also try to run 2 appeals a year, one for Christmas and one for Easter, providing some festive cheer for the Catholic men. Please do keep your eyes peeled on parish bulletins and the like. And if you'd like to get involved in some way, do get in touch and we'll see what we can do. We're currently working with some local branches of the SVP and looking, hopefully, if there is such a thing, beyond COVID-19 times. We'd love to increase our pool of volunteers, prison visitors, or just Catholics or Christians willing to assist us. You will have to go through a security check, which on average takes about a year to gain clearance and get a staff badge. So it's not a quick procedure, but everyone we've had who's done it, I promise you can say it's been, just like Jane was saying with her volunteers, has found it massively rewarding. But other than that, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to listen and tune in, and God bless, and do continue to keep all of prisoners across the prison estate, but obviously HMP Leeds, in your prayers as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And it certainly was a delight to visit you and seeing HMP Leeds. I'm sure you would agree that we have heard powerful and insightful testimonies from each of our four guests. So thank you very much, all of you. And now we can move on to the second speaker of this afternoon. Now, as commissioners, we had a number of meetings with the staff from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner for West Yorkshire, and took part at the launch of the West Yorkshire Victims and Witness Strategy earlier this year. I'm pleased that Mark Burns-Williamson, the Police and Crime Commissioner for West Yorkshire, is able to join us this afternoon. Mark was elected the first Police and Crime Commissioner for West Yorkshire in November 2012 and re-elected for a further 4-year period in 2016. Prior to his current post, Mark had a variety of experiences as a stonemason and 30 years gaining widespread experience in public, private and voluntary sector organisations, including, amongst others, the West Yorkshire County Council, the Citizens Advice Bureau, Parliamentary Office and the Rugby Football League. Mark, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hearing your address.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and I hope everybody can hear okay. I'm sorry for joining a little bit late, but I have managed to catch most of the speakers, so thank you very much for those presentations, which I found really interesting. And of course, I know Kate through the Restorative Solutions work and the commission of that contract, and Jane through the chaplaincy that I've visited on previous occasions, and know of the really excellent work that you both carry out with your teams and organisations. So thank you for that. So, as I've said, thank you for inviting me to speak today. And obviously the report itself I found really interesting. I think it's detailed, comprehensive, astute, and I believe it's taken about 2 years or so in terms of the consultation and the various conversations that have taken place, including with myself and colleagues from my office a little while ago. And I think it does present the reader and the Catholic Church and its members within Leeds with many, I think, very worthwhile challenges. And those challenges, I think, are quite practical, and I commend the report to you and for everybody that's listening in today. I think at times it's easy to observe things and pontificate and sort of advise without really looking at things in more detail. As I've said, I think this report does actually look at making efforts about how it encourages all of us to work together to make a difference, not just talking about things, but also actions around faith through living service, I think is one of the terms within the report as well, which I think is really positive. So there's much detail and so many down-to-earth ideas. It does make refreshing reading, and I hope that there will be ongoing dialogue as a result. I do particularly welcome the report's attempts to recognise the experiences of everyone caught up in the criminal justice system, whether that's victims, offenders, or jurors, or members of the community in some way. And it's not easy to do this, but we have to try and move forward in terms of some of the findings within this report. So I think the Catholic Church within Leeds is clearly encouraging practical commitments, such as offering buildings and estates to accommodate projects and meetings, as well as befriending and mentoring, which linking in with professionals in the National Probation Service, for example. And I think there are also many opportunities to volunteer within services for victims, such as victim support, and some very good training that goes with that as well. So this approach, I think, is very compassionate. It does make a difference to enabling a person to feel valued again, showing them that there is a place at the table for them, and that we can all contribute as members of the community, and I'll come on to that in a moment. I think also the offer does provide much needed support to voluntary sector organisations and looking at forms of sponsorship. And certainly since being elected into this role, I am a very keen supporter of the voluntary and third sector. And indeed, I set up a third sector advisory group to ensure that members of that group were or are playing a critical role in making sure the partnership efforts are on track as far as they can be. So with statutory organisations such as probation, the health service, and of course the police, they've all got their place to play in supporting victims, and those who have offered away from or ways away from criminal behaviour, it's often the third sector organisations rather than the people who work for them who make the real difference. Voluntary sector organisations are usually locally based, providing resources which are uniquely required in individual communities. Those who work for them are often very passionate about the place and the people where they live, and of the dedication and commitment towards what they do. In addition to that, they've often got roles in looking at how they monitor certain services as service users in some cases, but also can offer support without a particular agenda. And often it is very heartfelt, genuine support from people who have got some lived experience and who are prepared to give up their time to support others in making a difference between success and failure. One of the organisations I continue to support that some of you may have heard of or know about is the West Yorkshire Finding Independence, or Wi-Fi for short. And they've developed and embedded what we call a navigator methodology within many of their third sector and statutory partners. Principally, they use peer mentors who have lived experience, which gives a person with a multiple and complex needs an anchor and someone who understands or how it feels to have struggled in a similar way. So that they, in my view, they're living proof that a person can change and that the Wi-Fi model is non-judgmental, and peer mentors do not time out on anybody. They'd stick with them for the long haul, which is really important. So my team does continue to work closely with Wi-Fi to ensure that there is a lasting legacy of research and training, and that we can ensure that that model of working is sustained moving forwards. Our third sector partners are vitally important. So again, I laud your proposals within this report to support those voluntary organisations in whatever way you can, particularly during the current environment and the real challenge that we all face on the COVID impact that's having across the board. Within the report as well, you also recognise the importance of the probation service, and with the changes that we will see next year, I wanted to ensure that those third sector organisations, which are so crucial, can continue to play a part of the offer made and to those who have offended. To achieve this, I've gone to some real great efforts to try and rally support with other police and crime commissioners and all the criminal justice partners, including the Health and Department for Work and Pensions across the whole of the Yorkshire and Humber region. And indeed, I'm currently chairing a Yorkshire and Humber preventing reoffending group. So we must try to ensure that we make the most of these opportunities to reduce reoffending wherever we can, developing less complex probation systems, but one which is the needs of the service users and offenders and victims at its heart. I also support a range of organisations that support victims. Two crucial examples of that are the Sexual Assault Referral Centre, or SARC for short, and the West Yorkshire Independent Sexual Violence Advisors, which is a service, again, that we've been developing across West Yorkshire. Both of these services are open to self-referral, whether or not a victim reports to the police, and they are both available to recent and historic victims and survivors of all ages and indeed both genders. It's really important that we've developed the service in that way. They've both been nationally recognised as cutting-edge services, and in fact our new SARC premises, once you get a chance to hopefully visit them at some time in the future, in my view are a huge step up in terms of the facilities for children and young people, and the remote links that we will establish to the courts in there, which will make it easier to give evidence away from the courts themselves. I think we all know, though, that there's no room for complacency, and certainly I'm proud of the improvements made in these services and the availability of them to groups and victims and survivors. Moving on from the work with adults to efforts with our young people, and again I was very pleased to see the commitments that you make in the report to youth outreach, and I see this all too often, certainly prior to the COVID situation, about the withdrawal of youth services in many places because of the pressures on budgets. And I think we all know it is really important that the gaps which the COVID is now creating in the lives of young people, that these gaps can be sadly easily filled and exploited by those who might want to abuse or criminalise them in some way. So this is something on my agenda too. And again, you might be aware that we've been doing some work within West Yorkshire in the setting up of what we call our Violence Reduction Unit, VRU. So initially we were asked to make a bid for some government funding. We secured that for 2 years, and that's allowed us to support and look at some innovative schemes to engage and support young people who sometimes are already prolific offenders, but also those who may be on the periphery or tempted to take the wrong path. So we shouldn't forget that this is sometimes this is sometimes their experience of victims, for example, domestic abuse, that can then often drive offender behaviour and those early childhood experiences. So at one end of the spectrum, we've trained youth workers and worked with our local accident and emergency departments to engage those that have been admitted with knife injuries, because you've got that teachable moment, and in a sense they are a captive audience at that point in time. So it's really important that we have very skillfully supportive staff in there to help understand and identify what the dangers are, and really try and capture them at that very moment in time if they are in an accident and emergency ward. And at the other end, we're working in schools, helping those who are probably at a younger age but already potentially underachieving, and looking at what other opportunities there might be, for example, through construction industry pathways or tailor-made training schemes as a legitimate way forward, again, to try and divert them away from potential offending or getting caught up in that type of activity. So it will take a huge body of talented and committed individuals, I think, to make sure that these schemes are successful. But more than this, I think it will take genuine ongoing support from our communities to ensure that positive change can be sustained and developed. And at their frequent best, I think our church and faith groups are often central and can be key pillars of our communities within that work. So I was very pleased to see that the report does recognise that training and coaching of those involved locally will be needed to understand the environment and to be able to relate empathetically to those with well-being or addiction issues. And I think we're all aware of the challenges that are currently being unearthed as a result of the COVID situation. Again, I'm glad to see that it isn't just lip service, that it is a consolidated commitment to becoming educated, equipped and proficient in the supporting of those who are often in a much worse place than ourselves, but who need to feel valued and equal and have that self-worth to take up their own positive journey within society. But we know that we clearly can't do this on our own as individual organisations, and I'm pleased to see that the training for those involved with the Catholic Church will again look to signpost appropriately to services such as Restorative Justice that Kate talked about earlier. And I think we do have an excellent service in West Yorkshire, delivered through the organisation called Restorative Solutions, which I've worked with and supported, and I will clearly continue to link in with them to our victim support services as well. So bringing the impact of crimes home to those who have offended is, in my view, a proven way to develop feelings of remorse and understanding, and to really have that understanding of the gravity of actions that affects the victims. And that in turn, where it's appropriate, allows victims the space and support to meet with and to talk to offenders of their crimes, and that can be a hugely empowering experience as well for those affected, and an opportunity to move on and find some form of closure and understanding. But I think beyond remorse and rehabilitation, there also needs to be opportunities in place to fill the gap left by crime and antisocial behaviour. And that's something that is often raised by members of the community through the survey work and the conversations that I carry out throughout West Yorkshire. And those who have been victims need support to be able to cope and recover to whatever extent they can. And let's not forget that their experiences can be life-changing, either physically, mentally, or indeed both. So those who have offered need to be given the chance to feel valued and to rebuild self-worth through meaningful activity and either unpaid or paid work as a result of that can play a huge part. I was pleased also to read within the report your plans to support key issues around employment and training, and they'll be needed more than ever, I suspect, and to speak up for those whose previous convictions can cast a blight over their lives moving forward. So I have been lobbying where I can to ensure that a lot of effort is put into these initiatives to ensure that your efforts can be fully realised. And I support groups such as Offploy and Tempus Novo, who are based in West Yorkshire, and they're keen to ensure that they help people who have offended and who are given a chance to turn their lives around, valuing the diversity and difference that such individuals can make within the workforce, enabling them to be reflective of the society it serves. So it's empowering to listen to them, and I was very pleased to see plenty of references to that within the report. Last February, I launched the first ever victim strategy for West Yorkshire, supporting people harmed by crime. And I'm proud that this first strategic objective of the strategy is to, and I'll quote, put people and communities at the heart of the policy, practice and service development. So victims and survivors attended and spoke at the events we held about the strategy, along with myself, the Chief Constable, the Deputy Chief Constable and the Victims Commissioner for England and Wales, Dame Vera Baird, who is a close colleague of mine, having been the previous Police and Crime Commissioner in Northumbria. So offenders' voices obviously need to be heard too. And very recently, a report by Use a Voice, which is a charity organisation, has just been launched. And that's key in terms of organisations supporting and sponsoring the type of activities that I've already mentioned, but again, is highlighted within your report, which is very good. And work on this started about 18 months ago and represents, again, my commitment to including service users in the designing of future provision. So listening to them and their thoughts and concerns to develop better ways of working and making sure solutions reflect what they tell us is really important. And I was pleased to catch what Wayne said earlier on in the conversation. So, as I've said, as we know, it's often easy to label people, victims, offenders, burglars, thieves. We need to try not to use terms, but instead recognise that although a person may have been a victim or have offended in the past, that shouldn't define them for the rest of their lives. And I think anyone of any faith, including, of course, yourselves, as part of the Catholic Church, I'm sure will recognise that. And it's important what makes your efforts unique. So that ability to support or forgive and to see beyond a person's past instead of recognising the potential there. And as you say, seeking to deliver not only justice, but also mercy and support for those who have been victims. So I think the report really does highlight some really good opportunities that we potentially now have. I think it does encourage its readers and patrons to reach out and include everyone involved, regardless of their offending history. And of course, that's the Christian way, and to accept another person just as they are and to support them in a way which can encourage self-esteem, equality and reintegration back into communities, providing purpose and with a feeling of belonging. This is what those who are marginalised for whatever reason need in order to lead pro-active and pro-social lives. So again, I'd just like to finish by thanking you for giving me this opportunity to speak and to be involved, and to congratulate you on this, what I think is a comprehensive and thought-provoking report, and to encourage and support you in the challenges which lie ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And you clearly have read the report in quite a lot of detail, so we very much appreciate that. The official report was only one output which emerged from this inquiry. Earlier on, I referred to the overall aims of this inquiry, and amongst these, you may recall the one that said, make practical recommendations for action and change. Well, certainly, Mark has made a lot of reference to these recommendations, but I now would like to invite Tom Chibo, who, if you excuse the pun, is my partner in crime because he is the other co-chair of this inquiry, to give us a little bit more detail about the recommendations that have come out from the report. Tom is a senior organizer for Leeds Citizen, which is a chapter of Citizens UK. So Tom, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sometimes when organisations make reports, they're very much projects for the experts or for the elite or for the academics. They can be kind of full of good ideas, but maybe they don't lead to so much action, or they don't have so much connection with the people on the ground. So when we set out 2 years ago to start this project, we were really keen that that didn't happen with this inquiry. We wanted this to be different, and so that's why we brought together such a diverse pool of commissioners of different experiences and backgrounds. That's why we rooted our process in listening to people's testimonies and lived experience. And that's why we presented a series of recommendations which are very much practical proposals and ideas for action. And these ideas and proposals are for all of us. They are things for the bishop, for your parish priest, for parish groups, and for all of us as individuals. We all have a part to play in taking these things forward. They are quite challenging, but I think it's worth remembering the challenge that Pope Francis has set us when he asks us to become a church of the poor. That's really about, in his words, getting involved by word and deed in people's lives, bridging distances, being willing to abase ourselves if necessary, and embracing human life, touching the suffering and flesh of Christ in others. So what we're calling for is really deep listening to understand the challenges people face, and a courageous commitment to action, which may lead to some uncomfortable associations and challenges, but is certainly worth doing. So our recommendations are in 4 parts, and I'm going to very briefly introduce them, but you can read them in full and in detail in the report itself. So could we have the first slide up, please? So our first set of recommendations are really to do with raising awareness and inspiring Catholics. We are committed to maintaining a criminal justice forum at Caritas Leeds to take responsibility for keeping this stuff going and making sure that these recommendations are taken forward. But there are a range of other ideas in there, including making the most of Prisoners' Sunday and Prison Week, which we've just had, as an annual focus for prayer and liturgy and action. Bringing together prison chaplains, prison visitors, and community chaplaincies for shared learning through meetings and potentially a conference. And also creating additional opportunities for people with lived experience to share their testimonies with parishes and with Catholic groups. So these are all ways in which we can work together to inspire more of the Catholic community. Next slide, please. The second set of recommendations are all to do with encouraging local actions in parishes and deanery. So it's all very well that we've got this report and these great ideas. It's only going to mean something if in individual parishes and local areas, people are willing to take action. One of the ideas we think is worth considering are for parishes or deaneries to potentially adopt a public agency or a third sector organisation that's working in the field of criminal justice. And that way you could create a meaningful and ongoing local partnership with that organisation that might look at all sorts of different ways that people in your neighbourhood can work with them over the long term. As has already been mentioned, we recommend churches use their meeting spaces and offer them to charities and peer support groups who are helping people potentially coming out of prison or facing challenges such as mental health and addiction. And also we can use our relationships with employers and our status as employers ourselves to create additional volunteering and employment opportunities for people with criminal convictions. There are a range of organisations, including Tempus Novo and Giving Time, who are already doing great work to advise and support organisations and connect them with people with criminal convictions. And we're calling on the church as an employer to take this seriously and introduce this, but also for individual Catholics who are leaders in businesses or who work in human resources in secular organisations to show leadership within your own organisations and try and help them to take a step forward to do this. Next slide, please. The third set of recommendations are really to do with equipping us with skills and confidence to be able to act as champions of justice and mercy in the public square. We've noticed that there's a real need for additional training and capacity building activities, both for clergy and lay people who have a passion for this area or have found out about this inquiry and want to do something positive. And there are a range of different areas where we could do with some additional training and support. One is in restorative justice, understanding that system and making sure that everybody who is in a position of leadership or is a volunteer within a parish knows exactly how to signpost and support people to access restorative justice. I mentioned addiction and mental health before. There's a great need for training within our parishes for more people who have the right knowledge, awareness, sensitivity to support people with those challenges. And finally, there's a need for additional training, particularly for lay leaders in campaigning, media engagement and community organising, so that as Catholics we can play a more active role in the political process, in lobbying, in scrutiny, in participating in all the local ways in which we can influence the criminal justice system and champion a Christian approach which promotes mercy and justice. And we feel that if these things are done, we can actually create a much more inclusive church that is better capable to support ex-offenders, victims of crime, and their family to participate in the full life of the church. Next slide, please. And finally, we recommend that all of us take some responsibility for supporting reforms to the criminal justice system itself. And Bishop Marcus has mentioned already the ways in which plenty of ideas and reforms have been outlined by the Catholic Bishops' Conference over the years and stated in many reports. We believe that there needs to be a campaign strategy within our diocese where we can build local support for a number of different changes which are required based on the interviews and the testimonies that we heard over the last 2 years. They include raising care for prisoners, victims and ex-offenders as a political priority, improving the quality of and access to mental health services, creating parity of healthcare between prison and the community, and ensuring that all people who move between community and prison get continuity of care as they move. Increased funding for prisons themselves, but also probation services, rehabilitation services and restorative justice services, and a reduction in the use of short custodial sentences. And finally, there's a particular ongoing campaign around making sure that people who have left prison have a fair chance in the job market. And that's a simple action to do with changing application forms, and it's called Ban the Box. The idea is that we make sure that we give people the best possible opportunity to access work opportunities, and that they're not written out of the process or put off by unnecessary questioning or criminal conviction boxes and early stage of application. Again, we can adopt that campaign as an employer in the Catholic Church, but also Catholics who are leaders in their own organisations, who work in human resources, can show leadership in their own with their own employer by promoting that change too. So in those areas, you can see there's plenty of things for all of us to do. It's not just for the hierarchy of the church, it's for all individuals and parishes to get involved. And hopefully if you read the report and you get into the detail of those asks, you'll have enough there to inspire you or your parish to do something tangible to make a difference. I'm going to hand over to Joe now for the next section.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I'm sure you agree those are challenging but achievable recommendations. It would have been irresponsible for us not to provide you with the tools to actually help you in this. So in the next section, I would like to invite Tom to demonstrate our website and how to navigate towards it. It consists of resources, but it also consists of a local directory. So Tom, if you can demonstrate how the website works, please.
Yes, certainly. I think in order to do this, I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully you should be able to see what I'm seeing on my page in a second. And on the screen, you should be able to see the Caritas Leeds website. So we decided that alongside the report itself, we wanted to make sure that everybody could go on this website and find out how they can take action and get involved in a very, very simple way. So you'd want to start by going to dioceseofleeds.org.uk/Caritas. And on that page, you can see a big grey box which invites you to read more about the criminal justice inquiry. And once you do that, you get to a home page, and on the right hand side there's a menu which allows you to jump between different parts of our inquiry and find out different things. Many of the pages have video content, and these videos can all be shared, and you can transfer them onto your own individual websites, your parish websites and Facebook pages, where you hear testimonies and stories from people involved in the inquiry and the commissioners. But as you can see, we've broken down the pages really, really clearly so that everybody can find out things very easily. I want to highlight a couple of sections which are particularly useful. The first is a section called Our Findings. And there you can get a quick summary of what we were looking at, and you will be able to access the report itself by clicking on the report. And if you look on this page, you can see the PDF that you'll be able to download of the report, and it has all of the details, the testimonies, the tables, the statistics, the stories that you need to understand what we've been through over the last 2 years, and get inspiration for how you can take part too. Finally, I mentioned the idea of adopting a local organisation and taking some action locally to support justice and mercy in the criminal justice system. And this website helps you do that too. On the right hand side, there's a button called volunteering. And if you click that, you can hear some examples of volunteering that's been inspired by this inquiry already. But also you have lots of links to websites which allow you to search for local volunteering opportunities too. And just to use this one, Bradford, as an example, if you click on the link to the Do It website, you'll actually be able to see specific opportunities with organisations based near to you. You can enter the exact location in the diocese where you're based, and results will come up for current and up-to-date volunteering opportunities that apply to that location. So that means that regardless of where you are and what time you're searching, there will always be an opportunity for you to take some positive local action or build a relationship with an organisation that's doing good work in the area of criminal justice. So if you can see here for this example from Bradford, you can see that Langley House Trust are looking for volunteer befrienders. The Youth Offenders Board is actually looking for people to support restorative justice. And you can go down through the page and you can see the opportunities, save them, click on each one to find out how you can contact somebody specifically to help you. So that's volunteering. And then finally, at the bottom of the menu, you'll be able to see information about all of the different elements of the criminal justice system, all the different formal elements of the criminal justice system, and some brief bits of information which you might be able to use in your parish groups or to support people with your own signposting. So to use an example, I'll click on prison. And as you can see here, there's some basic information about the prison service, but also links to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons, where you can find out reports on the state of individual prisons and some of the services like Jigsaw Visitor Centre. And right at the bottom, we have a page full of links to local organisations which work in different fields, including prosecution, addiction, mental health, victim support, youth offending, and you can get all sorts of information and links to contact details for people who you can relate to, you can invite to come to your parish, or you can just read the information to find out more so that you're well informed. So this is all available on the Caritas Leeds website, which you can access via www.dioceseofleeds.org.uk/Caritas. And that big grey box at the top of the homepage will take you straight to the criminal justice inquiry.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much, Tom, for that. I'm glad you were the right person to maneuver through that website. I'm very proud of it, but hopefully it will be of a lot of use. So we come now to, well, what happens next? So Matt, we can have the next slide, please. I can't see Matt, so I don't know whether. Okay, thank you very much, Matt. As I can't see everybody on the screen. So the first part is about our role as Caritas. So as Tom said, the commission will continue, and obviously we need to promote the report, recommendations and resources, and hopefully there will be the recording of this event this afternoon will also be available on the website. As commissioners, we need to develop links with parishes and deaneries across our diocese. And we are here to sort of offer support to groups and individuals who are actually taking action. And the commissioners to lead on specific recommendations and coordinate campaigns. One of the last words in our report is that quote from Saint Teresa, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And that has been put there intentionally because, you know, as she says, I can do things you cannot, you can do things I cannot, but together we can do great things. So we need to bear that in mind and pull together to make these recommendations a reality. This obviously is not going to happen overnight, but with a start, we can continue to work on it. If we can have the next slide, please, Matt. I need to, right, okay. So this slide is really to promote the promotional brochure that the poster that we've actually produced. Every parish has received both hard copies and paper and electronic copies. And so do check if it's in your parish, and hopefully they are also being used. If we can remove that slide, please. Okay, so we come to the end of the afternoon, and as you would expect, this is a vote of thanks. There are a lot of people that I'd like to express our thanks for the work that they've done. I want to start with our speakers this afternoon, Bishop Marcus and Mark Burns Williamson, for their contributions, to Wayne, Kate, Jane and Chris for their personal testimonies and sharing of their experiences. A grateful thanks to all the 15 commissioners who showed such commitment and enthusiasm during the last 2 years. All those who contributed to our gathering of information stage, and I'm afraid there are too many of them to mention individually. I'd like to thank also Heather Tomlinson, who was employed to plough through and make sense of a vast range of records from interviews, meetings, and reports. Heather, together with Rachel Walsh, have been responsible for the work done on the website, which I'm sure agree that they've done a superb job. I'd like to thank Rachel Walker, one of the commissioners, who has managed our Facebook page, Matthias, who has provided technical support and the recording of this afternoon's event. And of course, it goes without saying to thank Tom as the other co-chair of the inquiry. And finally, I would like to thank you all for following us this afternoon. If we can have the next slide, which gives us details of the website, the Facebook page, and the contact email address. So it remains from me to thank you all for watching and the contributors. So let's all work together. And thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And goodbye and God bless.